Okay, we'll start with prayer. Our loving Heavenly Father, we give thanks we can meet to study via Zoom, and I pray that your Holy Spirit be with us to guide us and teach us as we seek to learn about the 10 horns of Daniel chapter 7 and how they're reflected on the 1843 chart. And I pray that these studies can be profitable to us and to your people. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm just going to share a paper called about the 10 horns of the 1843 chart. And we get the 10 horns from Daniel chapter 7, verses 7 to 8. It says, "And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, the fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots."
I don't see the page.
Okay, do you see the page? Anyone else?
I see it.
I can see it.
Okay, I'll stop sharing and just share again and see if we can pick it up this time. Can you see the
Yeah,
page?
got
again?
it. Yep, thank you.
Okay. So just pick up, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So the 10 horns of Daniel 7:7 are associated with the division of the Western Roman Empire and the 10 kingdoms. On the 1843 chart, they are connected with the toes and feet of iron mixed with miry clay in the image of Daniel chapter 2, and are separated into 10 parts. So just a note, normally people, when they connect the 10 horns of Daniel 7 with the image of Daniel chapter 2, they are normally associated with the 10 toes of the image. But Ellen White, she never makes mention of the 10 toes, nor does the Bible, and nor does the 1843 chart connect with the 10 toes. If you look at the Lombards here, you can see that just in the Lombards themselves, there's like about 4 toes there. Not that we can't make some connection with the toes. I believe that there is a logical sort of link.
Yeah. So the idea here, just to kind of clarify, so we have the 10 toes of the image, we have the 10 horns. Now here on the chart, they're associating the horns that are plucked up, they're associating them with the toes, correct?
No, they're just associating them with the toes and feet.
But they're not mentioning the horns there specifically. But this is something that's given in regard to the horns, that the 3 horns are plucked up. It doesn't ever talk about the toes being plucked up.
That's right. Yes.
Right. So it's kind of odd that on the chart that they show this in relationship to the toes, it would have made more sense to show it in relation to the horns themselves. So I just find that odd that they chose to do it this way.
Mhm.
So, but that means that they are associating the toes and the horns?
Well, they're just sort of picking up they're not really mentioning any particular kingdom with toes, but
Yeah, but they have them here. This is the toes. So it just seems odd that the 10 kingdoms are here being represented as toes instead of horns. Right? I mean,
well, I just see them, they're not represented as toes, but part of the toes and feet.
well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. So, because you can see there that there is the toes there they've took the feet and kind of cut them up into pieces, so to speak. So they must be associating the two together. They would just see it as the same thing, just a different vision.
Okay, thanks.
That's what I think that's happening. They don't tell us.
So on the 1843 chart there, I have read that. So the line separating the three kingdoms from the seven identifies those kingdoms which would be plucked up from the roots as a little horn was coming up from among the 10. So these kingdoms are listed below. So we just have their sort of the associated date, which I take to be when they begin to impact Western Rome and entering into their territory, crossing the Rhine or whatever. So that's the sort of the dates which are associated with that. And so this study will look into the history of each of these tribes on the chart and their associated dates before progressing to look at the history of the three horns that were plucked up. And so we're going to begin with the Huns in 356 AD date on the 1843 chart. So although the Huns were mentioned in the 1843 chart as one of the tribes to emerge and replace the Western Roman Empire, today most Adventist teachings on the 10 horns replace this tribe with the Alemanni. This change began at least with A.T. Jones. He argues that the Huns did not remain a kingdom to be one of the 10 of whom the little horn would have emerged from. According to the history of the Huns online, at the 356 AD date on the 1843 chart that is associated with this kingdom would be too early to mark their intrusion into Western Rome. The 356 date seems to have been the year of choice of Bishop Lloyd. So I have a footnote there just concerning who he is. So he was a bishop of St. Alsaph of Lichfield and Coventry and of Worcester. And he added a revised version of Ussher's chronology to a 1701 edition of the 1611 authorized version of the Bible. All the dates on the 1843 chart associated with the 10 divisions of Western Rome seem to be sourced from him. So just trying to. So A.T. Jones, concerning his dates, critically comments why Bishop Lloyd should be given the title of that excellent chronologer. We cannot imagine, for not more than half his dates are correct. He dates the Huns about AD 356, whereas about AD 356, they were in the depths of Scythia above the Caspian Sea. It did not cross the Volga till about 370 AD, and their first appearance to the eyes of the Romans was in 376. And I just have here who was so this was Bishop Newton. He was the person that credited him with being an excellent chronologer.
Okay, yeah, so just a little bit on that history. Now, remember in 1888, one of the issues had to do with these kingdoms. That's one place where it was discussed was in the 1888 conference in their studies, where Jones makes a comment, something about Uriah Smith says he doesn't know, or something. Anyway, he makes a comment that's sort of a snide comment, sort of inappropriate, kind of a jab at Uriah Smith. And he gets rebuked for it by Ellen White. You familiar with that?
No.
Okay. So, yeah. So it was an issue in 1888, the kingdoms of the division of Western Rome and how they related to but they weren't specifically talking about the chart, but obviously that's what they were discussing. So it was a contentious issue in 1888.
Right. So was it was Uriah Smith then? He had a different set to A.T. Jones of the 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
He had the Huns in there. He just had the old number of kingdoms and the names of the kingdoms, and introduced the Alemanni to replace the Huns.
Okay,
And
could you read? Sorry, go ahead.
And he disagreed with the dates that were given. So that's what he's talking about here. I mean, this is in one of his books, but it was one of the issues brought up in 1888.
Okay. Could you read the next section for me? Someone's just knocking my window here, so.
Okay, so the next section is where?
From the Huns likely entered Europe.
Okay. The Huns likely entered Europe shortly before 370 from Central Asia. They first conquered the territories of the Goths and the Alans, pushing a number of tribes to seek refuge within the Roman Empire. In the following years, the Huns conquered most of the Germanic tribes outside of the borders of the Roman Empire. They also launched invasions of the Asian provinces of Roman Empire in 375. From the 1420s, the Huns were led by the brothers Oktar and Ruga, who both cooperated with and threatened the Romans. Upon Ruga's death in 435, his nephews Bleda and Attila became the new rulers of the Huns and launched a successful raid into the Eastern Roman Empire before making peace and securing an annual tribute. Attila may have killed his brother and become sole ruler of the Huns in 445. He would go on to rule for the next 8 years, launching a devastating raid on the Eastern Roman Empire in 447, followed by an invasion of Gaul in 451, where the brutal but indecisive battle of the Catalonian fields took place against a Roman and Gothic alliance. The following year, the Huns invaded Italy, encountering no serious resistance before turning back. Italians fled to lagoons offshore in the Adriatic Sea to escape the ravages of Attila and settled there, building what would become the city of Venice. Punic dominion over barbarian Europe is traditionally held to have collapsed suddenly after the death of Attila, the year after the invasion of Italy. The Huns themselves are usually thought to have disappeared after the death of his son in 469. Some consider the Huns to be either directly or indirectly responsible for the fall of the Roman Empire. So this is taken from,
Wikipedia.
okay, so that's from Wikipedia. Now, how does this differ from Jones' dates?
I think Jones would be pretty much in agreement with this.
Okay,
So he would say that the Huns basically did not exist by 493 when the Heruli were plucked up. And so therefore, we're not part of, there had to be like 10 kingdoms then existing, so Huns weren't one of them. They weren't around then. They sort of finished about 24 years prior.
okay.
So I think that's his.
Yeah, so on the chart itself, on the 1843 chart, the dates then that are given for the Huns wouldn't even fit the history. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah. First of all, they shouldn't be there.
Yeah,
And
but
second of all,
yeah,
you would maybe have more of a 370 date, maybe, or 376. If
okay,
even, maybe even later, before they really made incursions into
Italy.
Western.
Yeah, definitely into Italy. So the date of 356 that he gives for the Huns, that doesn't even have any connection to any history.
Well, A.T. Jones, he says that they were still away near the Caspian Sea at that time.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's no reason to connect them with the 10 horns.
Okay. Yeah. So there, well, part of Jones' argument is that the 10 kingdoms are those that make up Western Europe.
Yes.
And 7 of them being plucked up, there would be 7 kingdoms.
Three plucked up.
Yeah, 3 plucked up. Yeah, 3 plucked up, which means there's 7 kingdoms that then make up Eastern Europe, which I still have always found a difficult argument to make. That is, I don't think you can say that it's just these 7 kingdoms that make up Eastern Europe.
Yes.
I mean, you have to combine a lot of them together. Like the Angles, for instance, are just the Angles and the Saxons. So you have to say that they're actually one group, sometimes called the Britons.
Well, the Britons were more those who were on the island before the Anglo-Saxons came.
Okay. But yeah, which I would agree that that's how it should be. But I'm saying some commentators just call the Angles and the Saxons the Britons incorrectly.
Yes.
Right. So that's what I'm saying, is that when you start with that premise that these 10 kingdoms are what make up Western Europe, I've never been able to fit them together. So I have never taken that position. I've taken the position that that's not correct. And I studied A.T. Jones quite a bit, especially 30 some years ago, and looked at his arguments. And I just felt that there was something wrong with this argument. But it is pretty traditional kind of Adventist view of it.
Yes.
Now I have one little question about that line that's drawn in there. Do we have any way of knowing whether that line is original or whether it was drawn afterwards? Because we know the stone that's in some of the charts was added. We know the goat head was added, and even that long horn going down the side was added. This line just looks so messy.
It looks at it, when you look at the Burgundians there, you can sort of see that it's actually going over part of the date.
Yeah,
Well, I don't think Fitch would make it like that. I think if he was going to do it, I think he would maybe make a wee bit more room.
yeah, that's what I would have thought. So it could have been added, though different charts have the line the same. Now, in order to add, because this is a lithograph chart, and it was done in just, you know, black ink, and then they added the color by hand. And so it's actually easy to add to a lithograph. You just run another lithograph over top of it. You run it through again. But it just seems like a messy line. I mean, I don't know if I would have drawn it like that. But it's hard to say.
So we'll move on to the next one, the Ostrogoths and Visigoths. So Ostrogoths means East Goths, and Visigoths, I think, means West Goths. I think that's the general understanding. So they're 377 and 378 AD dates on the 1843 chart. And so there's a Gothic War from 376 to 382 AD. And this war against Eastern Roman Empire, and in particular, the Battle of Adrianople, is commonly seen as a major turning point in the empire's history. So Adrianople is not far from Istanbul today. It's
Constantinople. Yeah, which we would normally, Constantinople is how they would have referred to it in the past. But yeah, Istanbul, Byzantium is the original name. Then it was Constantinople. Now it's Istanbul, right?
yes.
Yeah, it's in that area.
So yeah, it's just towards the border. There's a part of Turkey still in Europe, and that's in that sort of like a triangle shape almost. It's sort of towards the Bulgarian border.
Okay.
So that sort of region. And so that battle is the first in a series of events over the next 100 years that would see the collapse of Western Rome. So it's interesting that that's in 376, and then you have 476, basically 100 years exactly before when the last emperor, Augustus Romulus, ends. So that's the main date for the ending of the Western Rome. So in the summer of 376, a great number of Goths arrived on the Danube River, the border of the Roman Empire, requesting asylum from the Huns. So the Emperor Valens permitted the Visigoths to cross the Danube and settle on Roman soil on the condition that they provided soldiers to the Roman legions. The Grithungi, so that's like a tribe that existed, a Gothic tribe, they that name kind of ended around the 400s. They never wasn't really an associated tribe after that. So they also were displaced by the Huns and requested asylum as well, but were refused. However, with the Roman frontier forces stretched to breaking point, they made it across the river, but being desperately short of food and discontent was rising. The Romans failed to disarm the Visigoths. They bungled their administration and mistreated them, taking some of their children as slaves. The Goths then broke out of their containment area along the Danube and went south. Although defying the local Roman officials, they were not yet then in an open revolt. So the Count of Thrace during this feast, so this led to the Gothic tribes looting and burning farms and Roman villas. And then that count, he then attacked the Visigoths with hastily gathered troops. His force was annihilated, and the Goths equipped themselves with Roman armor and weapons, fearing they would join their fellow Goths. Roman troops of Gothic origin stationed in Adrianople were ordered by Valens to move east. The soldiers requested a 2-day delay to prepare, asking for food and money for the journey. However, the chief magistrate of Adrianople refused, and the Goths then broke out into open rebellion. They inflicted heavy casualties among the citizens, and arming themselves with Roman equipment, they joined Fritigern. So stop sharing there for a moment, Theodore.
Yeah, it did, but it went back. So they just missed you reading it, but the text is there. They missed you reading a couple of sentences.
All right, okay.
So that's kind of what happened. And so just something, I was studying this history regarding the Roman armies. So by the end of the 3rd century, so in the by 298 or something like that, most Romans weren't interested in being in the military. That is, things had changed so much to the point where there was no advantage for a Roman citizen to join the military that had existed in the past. So one is, in the past, in order to become a Roman citizen, you could join the military. So people could be living in Rome, but not technically Roman citizens. So people would often join the military for that reason. But also, by the time you get to the end of the 3rd century, there's no economic advantage. That is, you don't get to benefit from looting. So a lot of the normal perks that you would get being in the Roman military had disappeared. And most of the Roman military was actually manned by these Germanic tribes. So they were basically wanting to join with the Romans, but of course they didn't have as much loyalty or patriotism towards Rome. So often they would rebel. So it's kind of interesting. It was a video I was watching on the fall of the Roman Empire, and one of the main factors they believed had to do with this fact. So you can see here where they're saying, well, you can settle in here, but you need to be part of our local of our army, of the Roman army.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but sometimes they didn't get the food or the supplies, and so they would often rebel. So this is a really common problem that led to the fall of the Roman Empire.
Okay, thanks for that. So I'm just going to read a footnote I have here concerning these here dates. So concerning Bishop Lloyd, A.T. Jones remarks, his dating of the Visigoths in AD 378 is wrong because they crossed the Danube a year before instead of a year after the Ostrogoths. Besides this, of the Ostrogoths who crossed the Danube in AD 377, the last remains were slain in AD 401 while trying to make their way back into countries beyond the Danube. These therefore are not the Ostrogoths at all, who formed one of the 10 kingdoms, those being the main body of the nation who submitted to the Huns in AD 376 and regained their independence in AD 453. So in a sense, if Jones is correct here, both, well, Visigoths, you could maybe just say 376 should have been the correct date. And then Ostrogoths, you would have been looking for another date way beyond, way into the 5th century.
Mhm.
So just a wee bit about this here Battle of Adrianogall in 378. So Valens decided to take control of matters with the Goths personally. On the morning of August 9, Roman troops arrived at the battle site, tired and dehydrated. Some units then began the battle without orders to do so, believing that they would have an easy victory. And the Imperial School of archers, shield archers, attacked, but lacking support, they were easily pushed back. The Gothic cavalry surrounded the Roman troops, who were already in disarray after the failure of their first assault. The Romans retreated, but they were unable to maneuver, encumbered by their heavy armor and long shields. The casualties, exhaustion, and psychological pressure led to a rout of the Roman army. Valens' fate is unknown. He may have died anonymously on the field. His body was never found. The defeat at Adrianople signified that the barbarians fighting for or against the Romans had become powerful adversaries. The Goths, though partly tamed by Valens' successor Theodosius I, who accepted them as allies, they were never expelled, exterminated, or assimilated. They remained a distinct entity within its frontiers. For a time, they were allies, later independent, and often they were hostile. Then we move on to the Franks, the Suevi. Sometimes you pronounce it with it's like spelled with a B
Yeah.
instead of a V. Suebes, Burgundians and Vandals. So the 407 date is associated with these here tribes on the 1843 chart. And this is connected with what is called the crossing of the Rhine River by a group of barbarians, including Vandals, Alans, and Suebi, is traditionally considered to have occurred on December 31 in 406. So you could maybe say 406, but it's really the time they cross and so there's not really much in it. 407 is probably an acceptable date to associate with that. So the crossing transgressed one of Rome's most secure boundaries and was a climactic moment in the decline of the empire. It initiated a wave of destruction of Roman cities and the collapse of Roman civic order in northern Gaul. A letter by Jerome written from Bethlehem, dated to the year 409, gives a long list of the barbarian tribes involved. So the Quadi, Vandals, Sarmatians, Alans, Gepids, Heruls, Saxons and Burgundians, Alemanni, and the armies of Pannonians. So according to Bishop Hyades, the barbarians crossed into Spain in September or October 409. Gregory of Tours mentions that the Vandals left their own country and burst into the Gauls, and when they laid waste that land, they made for the Spains. The Suebi, following them, seized Galicia. Note that the Franks are not included in this account. A.T. Jones would agree with the 407 date for the Franks as being incorrect when he says their uninterrupted possession of territory and monarchy in Gaul dates from AD 351.
Okay. Now, the date December 31st, 406 is January 1st on the Gregorian calendar. So it's January 1st, 407. It's pretty close. So you could argue that one's correct.
Yes. So the only thing there is the Franks
Yeah.
shouldn't be, they should have had like an earlier date.
Mhm.
So maybe you could read the next one, the Heruli and Saxons for me, please.
Okay. Heruli and Saxons, 476 AD on the 1843 chart. From the late 4th century, the Heruli were one of the peoples dominated by the empire of Attila the Hun. By 454, after the death of Attila, they established their own kingdom on the Middle Danube and participated in the conquest of Italy. On September 4th, Romulus Augustulus was deposed by Odoacer at Ravenna. Odoacer exiled him to the Gulf of Naples. This event will later be romanticized in Western literature and history as the fall of Rome, and is traditionally used by historians to mark the beginning of the European Middle Ages. Though the real power in Italy was in his hands, Odoacer represented himself as the client of Emperor Zeno in Constantinople. Odoacer introduced changes into the administrative system of Italy and had the support of the Roman Senate. He was later titled King of Italy.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to read on?
Okay. The Saxons' origins appear to be in or near the German North Sea coast. Saxons, along with Angles, Frisians, and Jutes, invaded or migrated to Britain around the time of the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Saxon raiders had been harassing the eastern and southern shores of Britannia for centuries before, prompting the construction of a string of coastal forts called the Saxon Shore. Before the end of Roman rule in Britannia, many Saxons had been permitted to settle in these areas as farmers. According to tradition, the Saxons and other tribes first entered Britain as part of an agreement to protect the Britons from the incursions of the Picts and Irish. The British king Vortigern allowed them, you have to scroll down there, to settle on the Isle of Thanet. Is that how you say that name, Thanet?
Yes.
Okay, in exchange for their service as mercenaries. In 441 to 442 AD, Saxons are mentioned for the first time as inhabitants of Britain, when an unknown Gaulish historian wrote, "The British provinces have been reduced to Saxon rule." This would render the date associated with the Saxons on the 1843 chart some 35 years too late. According to this account, A.T. Jones says they entered Britain in 449.
Yes, so we can maybe agree with the Heruli date being 476,
Yeah.
but accrediting 476 to the Saxons entering into Britain is, as I say here, it's about 30 odd years or so
Yeah.
too late. So the Lombards, you have 483 on the 1843 chart. So the name Lombard was reportedly derived from their distinctive long beards. They're sometimes called the Langobards. I think some way they're called, so meaning long beard. So in the 450s, the 540s, Audouin, so that's one of the leaders of the Lombards, crossed the Danube once more into Pannonia, a territory we would now associate with Austria and its environs, where they received imperial subsidies as Justinian encouraged them to battle the Gepids. In the spring of 568, Alboin led the Lombard migration into northern Italy to the territory which their name is associated with today. So that's Lombardy. No evident event is found to be connected with the 483 AD date. The Lombard intrusion into Roman territory. So this date is derived from Bishop Lloyd, where he states, Lombards began to reign in Hungary, AD 526, and were seated in the northern parts of Germany about the year 483.
Yeah, so that's kind of tenuous, even to use 483, even based on his because he's not really saying that it's 483. He wouldn't have put that as, because they're not in conflict with Rome.
Yes. So I think Charles Fitch, I think he's kind of maybe under pressure to get this here chart out.
Yeah.
And he's just seeing Bishop Lloyd here, what date to put in. Well, he's not. He just sees the 483 date and thinks, well, I'll just put that in. I don't think there's much thought about it. There's not much study.
Yeah.
On the basis of Charles Fitch or others. He's just kind of threw it out there onto the chart, and it's not just like a minor detail, not think too much about it.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to, because we have in the Pioneer, because in Charles Fitch's writings, he doesn't mention the Lombards. Now the Lombards are mentioned in Signs of the Times, and they have this list. So this is Signs of the Times, May 1st, 1840. So this is some of the early Signs of the Times, because it came out in 1840. In AD 356, the Huns and other barbarians from the north began their conquest of the Western Empire. And between AD 356 and 483, they conquered the whole Western Empire and set up 10 distinct kingdoms: the Huns, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Franks, the Vandals, the Suevi, the Burgundians, the Heruli, Saxon, Angles, and the Lombards.
Sorry, do you want to share it?
Yeah, okay. So this gives a different list, right? Right, so you can see here they have the Huns, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Franks, the Vandals, the Suevi, the Burgundians, the Heruli, the Saxons, and Angles, and the Lombards. I mean, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I guess that's really the same list, just that they're putting the Angles in there with the Saxons.
So is there somebody being removed then for the Angles to be there?
Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No, there's nothing removed. The Angles are just included with the Saxons.
All right, okay.
Okay. So there's still 10. Just the Angles and Saxons are 1. So they have some of these same dates. 356, because the date that you have, that the charts had, the earliest one was what? It was, yeah, 356 for the Huns, and then 483 for the Lombards. So that would mean that the dates here that are being used by Litch on the 1843 chart, which is made in May of 1842, is just taken from.
You said Litch, you mean Fitch?
Yeah, Fitch, I meant Fitch. Yeah, is just taken from this Signs of the Times. So this is a list that already exists, but it doesn't seem that they've really spent the time to study it out. It's somehow set in, it's put on the record, and it's just repeated.
I think so, yes. So maybe Fitch, he's just going by this here work by Himes. And then Himes has got it from Bishop Lloyd.
Yeah, well, this is actually from Litch. So this is from this article here, Mr. Litch's reply to Reverend Ethan Smith and others on the Little Horn of Daniel's Fourth Kingdom. So it is actually an article by Josiah Litch that Fitch is then going to just take this information and put it on the 1843 chart.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
And any other times it's mentioned, so I'm just showing you here, you got, again, the same dates, Huns to the Lombards, and this is the same date you would see on the chart, and this is July 1st, 1840. So again, this is just the list that they have. So they set this list in place in 1840, and they just continue to repeat it. That's all I can see here. Yeah, and they're just using this list. They're not like demonstrating it from quotes or anything other than yeah, and there's some stuff in here that this is later. This is 1843. So I think they start to look into they started to, after the chart was made, they start to look at this a little bit, but I'd have to look into this more detail. And this looks like here, this is Dr. Weeks versus Dr. Weeks. So I don't know what this is about. But anyway, does that kind of help a bit?
yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, you can go back to sharing.
So the actual date, if you want to maybe associate with the Lombards, would be maybe, well, Hungary, it says they're reigning in Hungary in 526.
Yeah,
So was Hungary part of the Western Rome? Seems to be more,
Eastern.
yes. And then it's not until it says there the spring of 568 when they actually migrate into northern Italy.
Yeah,
So to even associate them, according to what we will later see that Jones says that the 10 kingdoms were already in that territory of Western Rome before 493 when the first one's plucked up. That it's even debatable therefore to have even the Lombards there, in that they are according to what A.T. Jones is saying.
okay.
So
So
it's debatable whether you can associate them with being one of the 10 horns.
Yeah, and then you got the Alemanni, and then you have your chart as well.
So do you want to read about the Alemanni?
Okay. These were a confederation of Germanic tribes in the upper Rhine River, first mentioned by Cassius Dio in 213. They apparently dwelt at that time by the main river, a tributary of the Rhine. The Alemanni were continually engaged in conflicts with the Roman Empire in the 3rd and 4th centuries. They launched a major invasion of Gaul and northern Italy in 268, and when the Romans were forced to divest much of their German frontier of troops in response to a massive invasion of Goths from the east. Their most famous battle against Rome took place what is in now Strasbourg in 357, where they were defeated by Julian, who was later to become emperor, and their king was taken prisoner to Rome. In the winter of 366, the Alemanni again crossed the frozen Rhine in large numbers to invade the Gallic provinces, this time being defeated by Valentinian. In the great mixed invasion of 406, the Alemanni crossed the Rhine River a final time, conquering and then settling what is today Alsace and part of the Swiss plateau. In 496, the Alemanni were conquered by Frankish leader Clovis and incorporated into his dominions, mentioned as still pagan allies of the Christian Franks, the Alemanni were gradually Christianized during the 7th century, which is interesting.
So normally we associate the Alemanni with becoming the German nation.
Yeah,
I think in France, the French language, they call Allemagne is still the name they give to Germany.
yeah,
It's really, it's not really, if they're just going into like Alsace and part of the Swiss plateau, maybe just encompassing maybe part of southern Germany or
yeah.
southwest. It's not really a large part of Germany that we know today.
Yeah. Well, Germany we know today is much different than the Germany in A.T. Jones' days, even.
So this here tribe, they seem to be kind of like more part of the Franks in a sense, like under their dominion for quite some time. I don't know if they're going to be conquered by Clovis and incorporated into his dominions. Although we do see them existing into the 7th century. But Jones, maybe you could still associate the Alemanni with being one of the 10 horns.
So, you know, one of the things because I'm not an expert on European history, especially in relationship to Germany, but I do know that there was Bavaria. You know, reading about history about Hitler, I mean, what became Germany wasn't really Germany historically.
Yes.
That's all I really know about that history. So the Kingdom of Bavaria, you know, if you go back in the past, you know, it's definitely, I think that's mostly what became what we call Germany. So I'm not sure how that relates.
There was a tribe called the Bavaria.
Yeah.
I think that's how we get that name.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose during the time of A.T. Jones, Germany was kind of like a new nation as a united nation.
Yeah, they
because that only happened really
yeah, especially the later part of A.T. Jones' history, Germany was kind of new. I mean, it kept changing because I know it even changed after the First World War. And then in the Second World War, I know that Hitler united parts of these different areas that we now call Germany.
So anyway, if they were going to be defeated by Clovis in 496, they were there for they had like a territory in Alsace, so that may have been Western Rome. Mm-hmm. And that was before 493 when the Heruli were plucked up, so you can maybe associate them with being one of the 10 horns. Mm-hmm. And this is just some various ideas of views you get with, like it's just giving you an idea of the variety of opinions concerning who the 10 horns are.
So why does Jones have the Lombards there then?
Yeah, I don't see his arguments. I haven't read anything there for how he justifies them being part of the 10 horns. According to his criteria, I don't think they should be. Yeah.
And now, so the only difference with him and Bishop Lloyd, as far as the kingdoms themselves, is he chooses the Alemanni over the Huns, but there are differences in dates.
Yes.
Okay. And then you have Isaac Newton. Just go back to the chart there. You have Isaac Newton, who we all know who that is. And then Bishop Newton, Lord Bishop of Bristol, would be his title. He's a relative of Isaac Newton's, I think a nephew or something like that, or whatever. But he has a different list as well. And if you look at his list, he just lists 7. So he's listed.
This
Oh, wait.
here.
What?
This is
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's down there. Okay, so he's got 3 more on this other one.
yeah. So this hasn't turned out too well.
It didn't turn out well. Okay, on mine, here, just hang on. I'm going to share my screen because I have the PDF. So on the PDF itself, you can see it better. Yeah. So, just hang on here. So here's what it should look like. And you can see here, yeah. So he's got the 7. So he's going to have, they have Ravenna and the Britons and the Roman Senate.
yeah, kind of strange.
Yeah, and then Isaac Newton has the Britons, which I think by the Britons he means the Saxons. Just he calls them Britons. So I don't think that's a different group. And then you see Azel Lyman. Now, who's he? Author of Lyman's Historical Chart. He was an American born in 1784, died 1873. So his looks much the same as Jones and Bishop Lloyd's, except for the Alani or whatever they are.
Yeah, sometimes you call them the Allens.
Oh, the Allens. Okay. Now, even in spite of all of what these people choose, in reading through a lot of these histories, one is it's an extremely confusing time period. Now, I think, modern historians have sorted it out, at least to their satisfaction, for the most part. But a lot of it still isn't very clear. That is, we would say that people in the time of Miller definitely would not have had a clear understanding of these dates and these events. That they would have had, to depend on quite a diverse view or diverse opinions on this history. Would you agree with that?
Yes, seriously diverse. This is just like a short list.
Yeah, there's lots of different tribes.
I've another document.
Yeah.
And there's just like maybe about 20 or so people, and all their ideas are different.
Yeah. No, and then you have some of these tribes where you even have mentioned that aren't actually on this last list, like the Gepids and so forth. So you're going to just have a difference of opinion. So part of the problem that I have then is even trying to name which nations should be on that list. That is, when we deal with the number of the 10 kingdoms, and this is where this kind of gets down to, I'll stop sharing. You can go back sharing yours, because is there more still on this to read?
Well,
yeah.
I'll just share. I've kind of downloaded that PDF. I think somewhere. No.
Yeah, because when we start dealing, we're going to look at Jones' criteria for the 10 kingdoms. And I don't know if I necessarily agree even with his criteria.
Yes. Well, he doesn't even keep it, go by it himself.
We should have 10 kingdoms. What's that? Keep mine on there?
No, Jones doesn't even go by his own criteria, really.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Do you got yours, the PDF to share or not?
Yeah, I downloaded it there, and
Here, I'll just share the PDF because it's there. There's the PDF. So we got to deal with A.T. Jones' criteria. Do you want to go through his criteria then?
Okay, so A.T. Jones, see, he says it would not be difficult to make up various lists of 10 nations that played some part in the destruction of Western Empire. It was not enough, however, just to do that, but one needs to consider if the nations established kingdoms, and did these kingdoms fall within the bounds of the Western Empire? And can these 10 nations be found within the time period marked out by the prophecy? And do the kingdoms that remain fulfill that which the prophecy says shall remain? The fulfillment of prophecy is not haphazard. The prophecy of Daniel 11 verse 4 said that 4 kingdoms would arise out of the dominion of Alexander, and exactly 4 did arise. The prophecy said that out of Rome would arise 10 kingdoms, and exactly 10 did arise, and they are all in sight before 3 are plucked up, as 1 comes up from among the 10. As we will later discuss, the Heruli will be seen to be the first of the 3 nations to be plucked up in 493. Therefore, any list of 10 nations that arose later than 493 cannot be the correct list. The other 7 must remain to the time when all the kingdoms shall give place to the kingdom of God. Not that the remaining 7 must always remain equally powerful kingdoms, and shall extend its boundaries, change its locality, shall never be brought low or made tributary to another, because in the same prophecy we read that, and as the toes of feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. Part of them retain the strength of iron, while others show more of the weakness of clay. But though part of them may be weak and broken, yet they are never plucked up by the roots. For in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall be left to another people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. The list of the 10 kingdoms that meet these specifications must be the correct list.
Okay. So how would you sum up his criteria then?
Well, it would be, there is quite a wee bit of a logic to it, which I do get the idea that the 10 are there before
493.
Yes.
But
So,
do they have to make up the kingdoms that then establish and become part of Western Europe? Or are they just the kingdoms that come and participate in the fall of the Western Roman Empire?
yes, he might be stretching things there to go beyond that, to say that they basically continue to exist, until Christ returns.
Right. So that's where I would have the problem. Now, so because the other point has to do with the scope of the vision. So we know that the vision, because this is the vision of Daniel chapter 2. And we know that this goes to the second coming of Christ. So Jones is making the assumption, since there are 10 toes, which the vision never really talks about, right? That is, the ones that talks about 10 horns and then being plucked up. Do you understand what I'm saying here?
Yeah, it just says, the Daniel 2 just says the feet
Right.
and toes. It doesn't mention 10.
Right. So obviously, we can't be taking Daniel 2 and saying that Daniel 2 has 10 toes, so there's 10 kingdoms, and that those kingdoms go to the second coming of Christ. Right, because it doesn't mention the toes, but we just associate the fact that, well, feet have 5 toes each, so it's 10 toes. But to me, this is kind of conflating the two visions. And this would be similar to what we do in Revelation when we take the beast of Revelation 12, the first beast of Revelation 13, and the beast of Revelation 17, and we just kind of mix them together. So when we deal with the horns themselves, though, this is actually quite different. That is, we can't associate the horns with the coming to the second coming of Christ. So part of this just has to do with understanding. Here, I'm going to switch over there to the Bible. So the vision of Daniel chapter 7, this is Daniel's own vision, unlike the vision of chapter 2, which is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So Daniel has this vision, and even understanding what this vision is about in its context, because he says, I beheld if we go back here, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. So this is going to be about 19 years before the fall of Babylon that he has this vision, I believe. And Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first beast was like a lion, had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. I beheld another beast, so that was Babylon, of course. I beheld another beast, a second like a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. Now why does Medo Persia have 3 ribs in its mouth?
It represents 3 kingdoms which will come under its dominion.
Okay, so do we have a parallel there to the 3 that are plucked up by the little horn? Right? Understand what I'm saying?
Do you have any more weight to that to make a connection, or just?
Well, it's just it has 3, right? And we know that there has to be a significance of the 3. Now, when it comes to Uriah Smith, he says the 3 ribs doubtless signify the 3 provinces of Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt, which were especially oppressed by Medo Persia. Now, of course, he says doubtless, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to not have any doubt. I mean, I'm not sure, but because I haven't looked into it. But one of the things we can say is that there is this symbol of 3 here, and you're going to see 3 again being plucked up by the little horn. So it's just a point there. And then you're going to have the leopard, which has 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast that also has 4 heads, and dominion is given to it. And then he sees in the night visions the 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So what people do is they associate the 10 horns with the 10 toes, and I don't think you can do that, because the toes, the argument is that the toes continue until the second coming, which I would agree that the feet do, but I don't think that you would. I mean, that, if 3 of the toes are plucked up, then there's just 7 toes. But we know that 10 is a symbol at the end of the United Nations, because it's this universal kingdom. So just as a symbol, even when we deal with the feet, even if we were to look at 10 toes, we wouldn't associate those with the 10 horns in this vision in Daniel chapter 7, right? Because we know here that 3 of these, it says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn. So this is the papacy, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So this is what Jones is really referring to as Daniel chapter 7. Now it's going to give it an interpretation of this. And it says in verse 23, thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. So that means they come out of Rome. And another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. So, and then it says, he shall speak great words against the Most High, shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, right? Now, he's going to continue for a time, times, and a dividing of times, which ends in 1798. And then the next thing we see is that the judgment will sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. So this is going to go to the end, but it really just goes up to the judgment, not to the second coming per se. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I don't think you can just take the 2 and just put them together like that, the way that the chart does, or even that Smith appears to do. Or not Smith, Jones appears to do. They all seem to be doing the same conflation of these 2 visions, or the dream and the vision. So you can go back to sharing, or maybe I can share.
No, I find it, I can share it.
Okay. Okay, you share. Just make it a bit bigger if you can.
So we just have here the correct 10 according to A.T. Jones. He says the 10 nations named by Edward Gibbon are the ones who established their kingdoms on the ruins of the Western Empire, and that fulfilled the prophecy. The following are the names of the 10 kingdoms with the dates at which they respectively entered the Western Empire and the places and dates of their settlement. So I'm not go into much detail looking at that there, other than I want to look at the Alemanni.
Yeah. So you have the Alemanni coming in and settling in Germany, but basically, I mean, some of these end up coming into Italy as well over time.
Well, actually more the Lombards, I'm thinking.
Well, the Visigoths, Italy, Southwest Gaul, spread into Spain. I mean, they don't really settle down into what I would call the nations. That is, you can't make a direct, between the countries that we have, you can't always make it just that it's as clear cut as this. That, the Franks just become the French.
Yes.
Right. I mean, it's kind of true, but it's like what we see as France is quite a bit different than just Northeast Gaul. So they go to the Seine River. Yeah. So, I just think it's a bit more complicated than this.
The Lombards, he has 453. They're in Noricum, which is parts of Austria and Slovenia.
Yeah,
So Slovenia, you would say, is not far from Italy today.
yeah.
So yeah, you can maybe connect that with Western Rome. Maybe that might have been a more suitable date, if that there is accurate.
Okay, so a question that I have for you then. So you've gone through this study, and you would say that what's on the 1843 chart as far as the 10 kingdoms isn't accurate as far as the dates, and you wouldn't put the Huns in there. You would say we would have to replace that with the Alemanni. You would agree with Jones?
Well, I think the Alemanni could be a tribe which is, meets that criteria which he puts on it. I wouldn't be as bold as he is in his claims.
Okay,
I'll be a bit more tentative. I say, well, maybe.
yeah. Now, so the way that we look at this, so we say there has to be 10 kingdoms, no more, no less. Now, Jones makes this argument, well, according to Daniel 11, verse 4, that Alexander's kingdom is divided into 4 kingdoms. But even if you
Yes.
look at that history, it's not as clear cut as that. That is, it actually is divided into a lot more kingdoms initially. And finally, it really just comes down to being 2 kingdoms. Correct? Like Syria.
Well,
So those 2 kingdoms.
there still existed. Like I know that Nicanor, is it Seleucid? He did take the territory of Macedonia and Cassander's territory.
Yeah.
But
But originally,
as soon as he tried to do that, he died.
yeah.
And so, but then another kingdom just kind of, I think it's Demetrius maybe, or it didn't really last too long. Anyway,
Right. But all I'm saying is it's not as clear cut as it just straightway divided into 4 and stayed as 4 for a long time. There's actually really only a very short period that you could say it's 4 kingdoms. You understand what I'm saying?
yes,
Yeah.
very short. I think maybe about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. So just this very short period of time that it's in 4 kingdoms. So some people make an argument, well, that was completely wrong. So Jones is using this, but it's not really a very good argument for his point. Now, we have to look at things from a biblical perspective. So one is, it doesn't really even say in regard to the 4 horns coming up, they are towards the 4 winds of heaven. It doesn't necessarily say that there's just going to be 4 only, but it goes into the 4 directions of the compass. But then eventually it's going to come down to 2, right? So you're going to have the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic Empire, Seleucid in Syria and the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt. So I don't know when it comes to how he looks at this. I mean, we can agree with the 3 that are plucked up. I think that's the main point. And that the 10 becomes more of a symbol than something that literally has to be listed. That would be how I've taken it.
I think that's a safer.
Why is Attila under the Goths, Lombards, and Heruli?
Attila the Hun there under the
Why is he under 3? Why does he have under 3 kingdoms there?
So you got the Ostrogoths under Attila, the Lombards under Attila, and the Heruli under Attila. Can you explain that, Stephen?
Yes, so they were in parts of Germany when Attila came from the east, and they were like his subjects for a time. In 451, they must have been maybe incorporated and under his empire for a few years before he died.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Yeah. So the idea that Jones has there regarding Attila the Hun is that he doesn't include them, but they are sort of indirectly included with these three kingdoms. That they're, and because the date that's given, 451, that's going to be the date. Why does he give that date?
Well, that's the date of the Battle of Catalonian Plains,
Okay.
or Chalons, it's sometimes called. It's the battle between the Visigoths and Rome, sort of like a combination of some Gothics tribes and Rome versus Attila. And there were some Gothic tribes associated with Attila as well. So in a sense, a lot of them were like fighting against each other.
Okay.
And it's not really a bit of an inconclusive battle. Some people think, well, Western Rome won that one. Some think it's a draw. So it's pretty like indecisive. And then Attila, then he went into Italy then for a few years and died soon afterwards.
Okay. So, I mean, the big problem that we have here is that, are we attacking the 1843 chart that was directed by the hand of the Lord and that the figures on it should not be altered? How would you address that issue? Because there are people who will argue it doesn't matter what history says, the 1843 chart has these dates and these kingdoms, and it's inspired by God. So how would you answer that? Because this is in your review.
Yes. Well, I said there was human imperfections with it.
Scroll up to that or down to it or whatever.
I'll find it.
Just on the next page, the top of the next page. Yeah, so back there, just go back there, right there, review.
Okay, so though the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord and it should not be altered, it is not without human imperfections, and the 10 horns betrayed was likely the nearest historical understanding that the originator, namely Charles Fitch, was aware of at that time.
Yeah, and we'd have to say that that's probably the case. Now, Jones has, I mean, he has an advantage because this is going to be, you know, roughly 60 years later that Jones is going to be writing. And so he has an advantage of a lot more information than Charles Fitch would have had. So how do we still, so once we start to say there's human imperfections, are we weakening the chart, or what are we doing here?
I think it could be strengthening the chart.
Okay. How so?
Well, we got more information nowadays,
Okay.
than they had.
Yeah, but some people would go through and say, well, everything on the chart is basically wrong. People just took the dates they had, you know, 677 for Manasseh's captivity, but that's wrong. And Babylon didn't fall in 538, it fell in 539. And 458 should be the real start of the 70 weeks. And, you know, Jesus was crucified in 30 AD, not 31 AD. And, you know, on and on and on, right?
It's a firm foundation we can build on it.
Yeah, but we know that here, when it comes to these 10 kingdoms, how would we argue that there's imperfections in these dates, but that doesn't affect the rest of the chart?
Well, what about the 490 date for the fall of Rome?
Yeah, and also, yeah, the 490 date for the fall of Rome instead of 476.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do we argue this? What do we do when people say that we're undoing the chart or rejecting the chart, or we're opening the door to further corrections on the chart, which shouldn't be corrected, except by inspiration, which already has been done prior to Ellen White?
Hard to say right now.
Okay, so what was your conclusion there? You have it written there.
Okay, but what of the other tribes that existed prior to 493 AD and entered former Western Roman territory, but are not in the 10 that Jones here identifies? Some of these tribes largely merged with more powerful tribes. The Alani, for example, had lost their king in battle about AD 417, and the remains of these Scythian wanderers who escaped from the field, instead of choosing a new leader, humbly sought a refuge under the standard of the Vandals, with whom they were afterwards confounded. The Rugai joined with the Ostrogothic king Theodoric the Great when he invaded Italy in 489. Within the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy, they kept their own administrators and avoided intermarriage with the Goths. They disappeared after Tottila's defeat in the Gothic War. So Totila was an Ostrogothic leader or a king.
Mm.
So in the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, August 28, 1900, Jones includes the Angles with the Saxons. In Britain, the Angles initially took territory north of the Saxons in what is called now East Anglia. Their name gave rise to the nation of England. Would it not be valid to identify them as a separate kingdom prior to 493 BC? How would we respond to a Roman Catholic contention that there were not 10 horns or kingdoms in this area at this time? It is totally ridiculous to say that these 15 to 20 nations represent a 10-horn beast.
Yeah, no, you're quoting from someone who makes
So this is, it's
Catholic discussion of Seventh-day Adventism by Stephen Korsman.
yes.
And see, that's why I would take it that these 10 are more symbolic than literal.
Mm-hmm.
That you don't need to name the 10, but you do need to name the 3 that are uprooted. And a number of reasons. One is we don't have, to any of these dates, we don't have time prophecies attached to them.
No.
Right, so that would be one of my arguments. There isn't a time prophecy attached to when these kingdoms would arise and so forth. And I would see the 10 as a symbol. But the 3 being plucked up, I mean, is also as a symbol, but we can actually mark the 3. So what do you say about these kingdoms? If you go on.
So I accept that the 10 kingdoms were formed following the fall of Western Rome. But while A.T. Jones' arguments have merit and may provide the best attempt to identify the 10 specific kingdoms, there are still nuances that would make me hesitate to identify them all with dogmatic certainty. So
Okay.
I'm just saying, the Bible, it says there's 10 horns, so there's 10 horns. there, no, but as to identifying them,
Mhm.
I wouldn't be, I would be cautious as to being dogmatic.
And you're saying we don't really have to name them?
Well, I think we could maybe, to me, I think you could maybe identify certainly like the Franks,
Mhm.
the Visigoths, taking Spain.
Yeah,
But it gets a bit tricky when you're thinking, well, there's the Saxons. Why pick the Saxons and not the Angles?
yeah, why make them one instead of two?
Yeah, and then there was like another tribe called the Jutes
Yeah.
that came into Kent. There was a kingdom there for a time.
Mhm.
So it's to me it's gets a bit messy. It's a bit you're on your ground to stand upon, and naming the 10
Yeah.
it's not very solid.
You know, one thing, I don't even know why they include Britain. I mean, sure, it was part of the Roman Empire, sort of, but just very sketchily for a short time.
Well, I think it was over 300 years.
Yeah, but still sketchily, parts of England, not really. I mean, Scotland wasn't really included too much,
No,
or Ireland or whatever, but I don't know. I mean, maybe that's part of it, is just it just takes it all as one, even though there's the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, you just take it as one place.
Mhm.
You know, Brittany, which
And it was really Rome really just abandoned Britain.
yeah, I know.
Never really. He didn't.
Well, they kept trying to hold on to it, but it really wasn't very valuable to them.
I think there was just so much going on in other parts that they just needed the soldiers.
Mhm.
They couldn't defend it.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, and so yeah, and yeah, and then it was basically just abandoned.
Mhm.
So, and quite early on.
Yeah, probably about 410 around that time period.
Yeah, well, you could even also argue maybe even a little bit earlier, the stuff that I've seen. I mean, it was there, but they weren't paying much attention to it. You know, in the later years. But anyway, we would agree with the 3 uprootings. So some people would say we need to identify the 10, but I would say we really just need to identify the 3.
I just I'll maybe have just one contention with what A.T. Jones says, is that's the date 538 of the uprooting of the Ostrogoths. But other than that, yeah, I agree that the Vandals were uprooted.
Right.
534, I mean, and 493 for the Hurrielai.
Yeah.
But I think it's a wee bit shaky ground to say 538
Mm-hmm.
for the Ostrogoths.
Yeah, and now you do direct us to an article from Adventist World, which I read.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an article addressing, how we should look at those dates. I don't know if I really agreed with it. I ended up not keeping it open, but
I'll have it here.
yeah.
But it's we're after It's 10 o'clock, after 10 o'clock here, so that would be,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we gotta stop, but yeah, it's called Understanding the 1260-Year Prophecy by Nicholas P. Miller. So you have a link to it. And I read through it. A lot of his arguments are very similar to Heidi Hike's on how you're going to identify the events in 538. So looking at the legal code mostly and not looking at battles. And I don't really agree with it. I mean, there's some truth to it, but I don't think that you need them uprooted in 538. It's the persecution that begins in 538 that does mark the beginning of the 1260. So, well, thanks, Stephen. That was a good study.
Okay.
Anybody have any final questions for Stephen? Daniel 2, verse 41 to 42, somebody put a note there that it mentions the toes. So I'm just going to go there, Daniel chapter 2, 41 to 42. It does mention them, but it doesn't mention that there's 10.
Well, the feet would be, you'd assume that the feet, you'd be 10 toes.
Yeah, but yes, but I'm just saying that it doesn't mention the feet. It doesn't mention the number of toes, and it doesn't mention that 3 of the toes are plucked up or anything.
No. But so the fact that it mentions toes,
Yeah.
got to give you some significance to them, to that.
Well, it says the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay. But if we're going to look at the toes, that would be really the end of the kingdom. But you wouldn't try to put those toes in 538. There's a difference between the vision of Daniel 2 and where you're marking the toes than where you would be marking the 10 horns. Because the 10 horns, 3 are going to be plucked up. And then you're going to have this little horn, which is going to be the papacy. But with this image, at the end, there's the 10. And so we would have to try to understand that, how we apply that. So that's all I'm saying.
yeah, maybe the 10 kings of Revelation 17.
That's the way that I look at it, is it deals with the United Nations.
Well, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah. Because this is at the very end when Christ returns, but we don't see that in Daniel chapter 7. I mean, it's going to get to the second coming of Christ, but not when the 3 are plucked up. So when the 10, there isn't 10 that exist at the end of the horns. So
yeah.
So I think it's just a distinction that, often hasn't been made. Okay.
So you sort of just, you mentioned the, how would you say about this 1843 chart? Would you weaken it?
Yeah.
We'll maybe address that another time.
Yeah, I guess we can address it some other time. I mean, it's not something you could just say quickly.
Take a while.
Because you want to deal with the fact that you can add up the 3 that are uprooted and it adds up to 1260.
Well, that's kind of like a divine hand, I think,
Yeah, so I still think God's hands, even in what happened, even when there's what we would call human imperfections, that they occur for a reason. Would that make sense?
Yes, even the 490
Yeah,
is like a close of probation symbol.
yeah.
So you have 158, the cross, and then 490. So it's like the midnight cry, the Sunday law, and then the close of probation waymarks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that these are all very significant. Anyway, do you want to close with prayer, Stephen?
Yes. Your Heavenly Father, we give thanks and praise for your love for us and for the word that you've given us to understand. through your Holy Spirit, the words of Scripture. Father, we desire to get to know your plans for this earth, for our lives, and for the work you've placed within us that we desire to accomplish for you. Father, I pray that as we continue on, that we can dig further into the treasure that is found in your word and to discover further gems. And I pray that we've tried to be honest tonight concerning these here 10 horns and to understand them a bit better. I pray we've tried to do that, and I pray that you enlighten those who are watching this presentation, that they too can be more settled into the truth of the 10 horns. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you very
Well,
much.
Thanks, Stephen.
And thanks everybody for participating, and God bless. Have a good day.
We're still recording.
Yeah, okay.